Well, I keep on thinking, George, you remember how William F. Buckley once said that he would rather have America governed by the first 1,000 names in the Cambridge, Massachusetts phone book than the members of the Harvard faculty? And just looking at this through the political lens, presidential election is a year from next week. It's going to seem like a year, 6 months from next week. Are we in a situation where this is teeing it up for Donald Trump to say, you Americans have been led by an out-of-touch elite that has been educated in places like Harvard and Columbia and Penn that are doing things that sound strange and out of the mainstream? Is this an advertisement to his voters that essentially says, elect Trump, throw out the civil service, and throw out all these people who have been misgoverning you for decades?
Look, Michael, I was 8 years old in 1968. It was a kind of formative political experience for me as a little kid. And we all know what happened that summer in Chicago when there were street battles between activists, anti-war demonstrators, and the Chicago cops. And that led pretty directly to, among other things, to Richard Nixon getting elected. Of course, Donald Trump and the Republican Party are going to take advantage of anything that appears like chaos or an indulgence of chaos on the part of Democrats. So I think what we're seeing now on campus is probably a prelude to what we're going to see in Chicago, where the Democrats are going to have their convention again, I think for the first time since '68, as if they just couldn't resist returning to the scene of the crime this summer. And I don't think it's going to be a scene that will help them to show that Joe Biden's in control of the country. And that's sort of been a recurring Republican attack, that the country and the world are out of control and he's too old and feeble to keep them under control. Can I say one thing about the demonstrators, which is I think they properly were horrified by
everybody.
Number of deaths of civilians in Gaza. And when they called for a ceasefire and peace, they seem to be calling for an end to this suffering. But that has shifted to calling for an end to Zionism, which is essentially an end to Israel. And in Arabic, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, is actually Palestine shall be Arab. I don't know if the students know that, but it's a call for the elimination of Israel. How is it that students have perhaps unwittingly embraced the ideology of Hamas? I think it's because they have been trained and educated in an atmosphere where there really is only one truth. And that truth is that there are oppressors and there are oppressed. White Jewish Israelis, as they see it, are the oppressors. Non-white Arab Palestinians are the oppressed. And that's the end of the story. It's as if Israel's the last place where post-colonial theory can go to find oppressors and victims. And so it becomes a very simple matter. And the whole complicated history of those two people is erased.
Understand what I heard him say about young people believing this is an oppressor versus an oppressed relationship between Palestine and Israel is that we have lost the ability to brainwash our young people about colonialism. This is why TikTok is going away. Because do you understand when you have primarily, because on these campuses, primarily white people doing these protests, if you have white people, young generation white people saying, fuck this colonialism shit, do you understand we have reached a new level of consciousness? This is what they're definitely afraid of. They are definitely, because if they lose future white generations, how can they perpetuate this?
The encampment at Columbia very clearly said, we are not asking students around other schools to stand in solidarity with us at Columbia. We're asking people to stand in solidarity with us, with the folks of Palestine. It is the main issue. And I just want to throw out, Empire likes to use its tools to distract from that main issue. And they do it by having institutions and organizations suppress the people speaking out, as well as using violent law enforcement. When they do that, they draw the energy, or try to draw the energy, from the protesters away from demanding that Israel stop its slaughter, blockade, and apartheid, and its genocide. The empire tries to draw the energy away from that so that protesters are focusing on the schools, their institutions, and the law enforcement, both of which are suppressing them. But it is a tactic that has been used forever. Let's get the protesters mad at the school administration. Let's get them angry at the police. And then it dilutes the message, or they try to dilute the message, which is free Palestine, end to apartheid, end to the illegal settlements in the West Bank, right of return, end of the genocide, stop U.S. weapons flow, right? That's the issue. And what's happening, despite the school and the police, the schools and the police, the students are saying, we are here to stand up for Palestine. Our message will not be diluted. Our enemy is the military-industrial complex, colonialism, and apartheid. And I think it's an important thing to understand how they try to dilute our energy by making us fight with police and school administrations, but the students are always one step ahead. And it's important to understand that, and I'm really glad that's the case.
That is an absolute great preface to this next video. Actually, we're going to play this later, but as you talk, I was like, wow, that's actually speaking to this part, which Morning Joe has been having a lot of cope sessions lately, where they're coping with, in particular, what's happening on college campuses, because they have to walk the line of, because these same people that they're mad about on college campuses are the same people they need to come out and vote for Joe Biden. But when you said those people in the orange vests were faculty, because I didn't understand initially until you said that, why I kept hearing the critique be on the faculty dropping the ball. So the faculty at Columbia, they're saying they're dropping the ball because they're standing back and saying, no. This should be free speech. You should not be doing this. That's what they meant. And I didn't understand why they had that assessment. And I saw it in several segments. So they talk about this in this segment, and they also talk about other things about this protest, in particular on Columbia University and some the other Ivy League schools. But let's listen. I'm going to play a good chunk of it, maybe 2 minutes straight, and then we'll comment on the other side.
I'd like to think that what the students feel about the university is important enough that maybe we could bring this university to a halt and really reorder its priorities. But at the moment, it doesn't seem that this is possible at all. We may halt classes for a few days. We may even halt it for a spring. But ultimately, we don't change the foundation of this university, which is essentially an enormous business corporation.
That was a Columbia University student speaking to NBC News in 1968 about ongoing protests at the school in opposition to the Vietnam War.
I've got to say, it makes as much sense in 2024 having 18 or 19-year-old people running college campuses as it did in 1968, which is to say,
I got to stop it here, because understand what Morning Joe, who is their audience? Because they believe they found a gem, Professor. They think that this is a gem that they found. Look at this student talking about basically how protest isn't gonna bring about real policy change from a government. See, it was ridiculous then. It's ridiculous. That's what they take from that, which is amazing. But it also speaks to who their audience is. Their audience is the people on the other side of protests. Their audience is the people who are on the other side of labor protests, for example, of strikes, of unions, of healthcare protesters. So the people who watch their show, that's their audience. But just wanted to make that comment. Let me finish the clip here.
Sense at all. And you do wonder where the adults are, the adults that are supposed to be running the university, the amount of money that they are paid to educate students, and they can't allow students to go to class because a small subset of those students and outside agitators want to shut down the camp. Where are the adults? It's staggering. Not just to me. I know I'm a conservative. Not just to me, but to 90% of Americans. They want to know where the adults are at Columbia. They want to know where the adults are at Penn. They want to know where the adults are at Harvard. They want to know where the adults are at all of these college campuses where they're letting their students and outside agitators run across the campus, shut down debate, scream whenever anybody tries to talk reason to them, shout genocidal chants, hold up signs pointing to Jews saying Hamas's next victims, holding up signs talking about the final solution, chanting constantly from the river to the sea. You know what from the river to the sea is? If you don't, that's all right. Most of the students chanting it don't understand that they are chanting genocidal comments.
All right, joining us now.
They want to.
So I'm just gonna. I had some specific questions, but he said a lot there, and I don't know what stood out and what triggered you more. So I'm just gonna give you a more broad question, and that is, what stood out to you in just that short, sort of 45 seconds? Because when he's saying, "Where are the adults?" he's talking about you and your colleagues. That's who he's speaking to. So, what is your sort of take on what his analysis?
Well, he's obviously Joe Scarborough and Mika are obviously terrified. This is how terrified people in respectable outfits on television show that they're terrified. They don't scream. They don't shout. They do exactly what Scarborough is doing, demeaning and belittling the protesters, not talking about the reason they're protesting, which is a genocide, purposely misconstruing and misrepresenting their message, and making a historical link. See, this has happened before, he's saying. The lunatics took over the asylum before. We can't let it happen again. It's not a good idea. Listen, the campuses belong to the students. And nobody is saying what I said in my introductory remarks here today. Nobody in that news show will deal with it, or any of the detractors. These are students in tents sitting on the grass. Most students in the encampment, well, I mean a good number, don't stay there overnight. The faculty goes. People hang out as long as they can, you know, when they're not doing other things they need to do. Some of them are there the entire time. But all it is an encampment on a lawn.
Right.
And they won't say that they're threatened by a bunch of kids in tents. As far as the faculty goes, what they're asking is, this is privilege speaking to privilege, right? This is the wink and a nod where Joe Scarborough was saying, hey, adults, hey, faculty, you got it nice. Why would you not just sit back, let the genocide happen, let the students get arrested and expelled? You got it good. You're teaching at GW, you're teaching at Columbia. Just, that's the wink and a nod. It's the same white fragility that existed with Black Lives Matter. Why are you standing up for that? Why would you? You're white. And privilege is speaking to privilege, but the faculty that I've spoken to and that I hear from on a regular basis are 100% committed to these students and to the people of Gaza and the West Bank and all colonized peoples around the world.
Absolutely. I couldn't say that better myself. And let's continue. When I was watching this segment, Anthony, all I could think about is the questions I was going to ask you, because of some of the things, because this is, you can feel sort of the animosity the ruling class has towards these protesters, because it's a critique on U.S. empire that they're saying, stop doing this. It's a critique on that and all the things that the students are saying, that this is oppressor oppressed. That is really triggering to them. And they mentioned that in several segments on Morning Joe this morning. Now, we may not get to all of them, but let's listen to a little more of this segment where they're ranting about student protesters.
To wipe out all Jews, and they want to destroy the state of Israel, and they want to kill Jews and push them. See, they are Hamas on college campuses when they chant that.
Some of them may not even know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point.
But the adults there do.
Yes, they do.
And yet, this, by the way, this is a long time coming. This has been coming since the 1960s. And now the people that were burning down college campuses, the people that were taking over presidents' offices, those people are now on the faculty senate, in the faculty senate.
Is that you? Were you burning down stuff and now you're on the faculty senate? Were you that type of, because that's what they're saying basically. Right. The reason the faculty is not repressing more students is because those faculty members were the same people that were just on the video we just saw protesting Columbia back in the day. Could you speak to that? Is that true? Does that ring true to you?
I mean, there are some faculty who were absolutely involved in the anti-empire, anti-colonial, anti-war movement, which, you know, kind of galvanized around the Vietnam War in the 60s. But no, I wasn't old enough to be protesting the Vietnam War. If I was, I would have. So, you know, but here's the thing. Hillary and Bill protested the Vietnam War, right? A lot of the folks in the Democratic Party, some of the folks in the Democratic Party, the elders, were not Joe Biden, though, because Joe Biden was an establishment guy from day one. And some of them were involved in that movement. They see this as different. And what the faculty believes, I'm not speaking for anybody but myself, but what many faculty, I'm not just talking about Columbia, I'm talking about around, is that, you know, it's our jobs to co-create with the students an atmosphere that allows dialogue, that allows exploration, that allows discussion around multitudes of topics that move us to a place where we can critically look at who we are, where we are, and I'm going to boil it down so it doesn't sound so like ethereal. And this is one of those issues because it ties together colonialism, empire, profit, establishment, business as usual, racism, white supremacy, all of those things. And we need to be able to talk critically about it. Nobody in those encampments is trying to prevent, not just Jewish students, anybody who is pro-Israel and what Israel is doing right now. Nobody's trying to prevent them from speaking out. And notice these counter-protesters come to our protests to disrupt them because they want video footage of getting yelled at. And the bottom line is there's not a lot of that. Why aren't they? Have your own protest. You really believe Israel's doing the right thing? You have every right to stand up and say it. And I'm not going to go there and shut you down. I am confident enough, and so are the students and faculty protesting around the country. We are confident enough in our opposition to genocide and apartheid that we are not threatened if somebody holds a different view.
Right.
And I will dialogue with anybody about it. I get that people look at things differently, but we've got counter protesters trying to infiltrate, coming in, disrupting, because they don't want the voice to be heard. I want to point something out. I watched, I think you covered it too, RBN definitely did, Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
And whenever they have one of those very well trained pro-Israel genocide folks on there, they engage. I saw it happen. Crystal Ball was on last week. And, you know, she was trying to be very clear in explaining what her view was. And anytime a person, a guest on these panels, mentions the 15,000 kids buried under rubble, it's a genocide, Israel's purposely targeting civilians, World Central Kitchen, and 200 other aid workers, anytime they do, the trained PR folks, some are part of the Israeli government, some aren't, talk over them. Because what their goal is, it's a very clear tactic they use. They don't want the words Israel is guilty of war crimes to be heard by an audience member listening to the Piers Morgan or the MSNBC show. They don't want the words 15,000 kids buried under rubble in areas. NBC did an investigation. Hey, Joe and Mika, NBC just did an investigation, NBC News, showing that in at least 7 instances, Israel firebombed and killed innocent civilians in places that Israel specifically told them were safe to go to. Where's that's your parent company, Joe Scarborough. So they don't want the voice to get out that says this is genocide, this is apartheid, this is anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Palestinian Islamophobia. I mean, even though there's Christians there too, it's all of those things, and they don't want that out. You'll notice they don't talk about it. They don't talk about the humanity and the destruction. They, you know, and all their guests they don't have opposition guests that I've seen. You know, when they have, they shut them down very quickly and don't ask them back. But when you hear people say on Piers Morgan, who, listen, I don't love his viewpoints, but he's done a decent job of inviting guests on who are pro-Palestine. And I'm like, thankful for that. But then these PR people for the genocide and for the IDF come on and they just talk over. They don't want the words to get out.
That is a blatant tactic that I've also pointed out in other cases too. But in these sort of cases too, where and I have the same sort of analysis of Piers Morgan, where he's like there's another guest that's like that, where the person is not good at all. It's just that they are willing to bring on good guests, and that's why people watch, or that's why I engage in that show. Democracy Now! is also like that. Let's listen to a little more of this, and we'll comment and close out this video part of it and get to the next receipt. But let's play maybe 2.5 minutes of this now.
Trying to encourage these students to do the same. They helped elect Nixon. They I guess they want to elect Donald Trump in 24. Good on you guys.
Okay, joining us now, staff writer at The Atlantic, George Packer. His latest piece is entitled "The Campus Left: Occupation That Broke Higher Education." Also with us, Chief Content Officer and Editor-in-Chief at Forbes, Randall Lane. Forbes is out with a new piece this morning entitled "Employers Are Souring on Ivy League Grads," while these 20 new Ivies ascend, which we are unveiling exclusively here on Morning Joe. And it really has a lot of synergy with what we're covering in terms of these protests, but it's bad news for Ivies and good news for some universities that usually don't get a crack at being at the front of the line.
So many parents that I've talked to from, Connecticut, when I lived in Connecticut, they're sending their kids south. I talked to administrators at Southern universities, SMU, Vanderbilt, of course, Alabama, Georgia, Southern universities. A lot of parents sending them south. It's really sad. George, I want to make sure people watching don't associate any of my conservative, born in the USA comments onto you, because you actually wrote a very thoughtful piece. And let's read it right now.
So
in the piece, right with George.
You write in part this, George. 56 years ago this week, at the height of the Vietnam War, Columbia University students occupied half a dozen campus buildings and made two principal demands of the university: stop funding military research and cancel plans to build a gym in a nearby Black neighborhood. The current crisis brings a strong sense of déjà vu. Ideas born in the 60s have become the instincts of students who are occupying their campuses today. Between oppressor and oppressed, no room exists for complexity or ambiguity. There's nothing to debate, which I think education's about. Elite universities are caught in a trap of their own making, one that has been a long time coming. They've trained pro-Palestinian students to believe that on the oppressor-oppressed axis, Jews are white and therefore dominant, not marginalized, while Israel is a settler colonialist state and therefore illegitimate.
Now, I mentioned this
They've
before.
trained pro-Israel students to believe that unwelcome and even offensive speech makes them so.
I mentioned this earlier, but this part where they're talking about settler colonialism and they're talking about oppressed versus oppressor, this to me is one of the most jarring and scary things to the establishment. Is that it's because if you have young white people who the majority, or even of a large number of them, even they say it's not the majority, let's say it's 40%, now sort of accepting that as a reality, accepting that as an accurate analysis, the empire is doomed. You get what I'm saying? The empire needs to be able to sort of pass the keys down to the next generation to sort of continue this ideology. And this is one of the most shocking things to them. And that's why they write it in this article that they're going over. Let me play a little more and then I'll bring you in for some comment, Anthony.
So unsafe that they should stay away from campus. What the universities haven't done is train their students to talk with one another.
And George, we've seen that.
1 second, let's see.
Yes, not only in elite universities. I think we've talked to you about this before, about even schools in Manhattan, where parents send their kids to schools, and some of the thinking that is permeated, the thinking that undermines liberal education. Talk about what you're seeing right now on college campuses and how this has been a long time coming. And most importantly, when we get beyond this, what it actually says about the death of liberal education in some of these elite universities.
Yeah, well, first, students have every right to protest. Free speech has to be at the heart of a liberal education. When speech crosses the line into coercion, when it interferes with the rights of other students to get an education, when it seems to be a form of harassment and discrimination based on the identity of the other students, then it's no longer free speech and it has to be sanctioned.
That is bizarrely incorrect.
It's
free speech explicitly protects some of the speech he's just mentioned. It doesn't protect. That is exactly what it's for. Free speech is not to protect speech that you agree with.
Right.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anthony. You were going to.
Well, yeah. I mean, the guarantee of free speech is not for popular speech; it's for unpopular speech. Oddly, right now, they're trying to portray the students as engaging in unpopular speech, but the majority of the United States right now is opposed to what Israel is doing in Gaza. I mean, it's a clear majority, which means Republicans, Democrats, and Independents together, the majority polled, are against what's happening. So, in Gaza, and majority of people that voted for Joe Biden in 2020 have said they believe that Israel is committing a genocide. But still, it is not considered acceptable speech by the empire. The other thing is, what this guy just said sounds reasonable. Listen, I'm for free speech, but when you use speech that's coercive or that you're trying to prevent others from learning, that's not happening. First of all, I don't know what you mean by coercive. I keep saying this. I'm from New York. If you can't walk down a city street, on any given day and not be shocked by like seeing some sort of protest, small or not so small, about something. And if you don't like it, you walk across the street. It's New York, it's Chicago, it's LA, it's wherever it is. Secondly, there is no hate in the message of these students at these encampments. If you're going to focus on a few fringe kooks, mostly that were in the streets,
Yes.
that it came out, the student at Columbia, the person at Columbia that held a sign saying this group of students and pointing to Israelis should be attacked next, wasn't a student or a faculty member or staff, wasn't a member of the Columbia community, and somehow got on campus. So this myth that there's agitators indoctrinating students is just absolutely not true. So there are some classes that people elect to take on colonialism, on Middle East studies. You're going to hear from a variety of folks with perspectives on that. But like my social work students in Columbia, the social work students were, I think, the first students on the campus to have a sit-in, right? And I don't teach about Israel and Gaza. I mean, I mention when I talk about trauma, conflicts in the world and how they're affecting children, conflicts in Ukraine, Sudan, Congo, Gaza, and the West Bank. Absolutely. But that's not the focus of my teaching. I taught a human behavior class this year. I taught an addictions class last spring, right? So it's really important to understand these students are not being indoctrinated. They are reading, they are studying. And I see students in the encampment reading books about what's going on and the history of the Nakba and things like that. Chuck is right. They know more than we do. We're getting an education from them. But this myth of indoctrination is very volatile and very toxic. And it's just, there's no basis in reality. These people, they just say these things and they don't bring receipts. From the river to the sea does not mean kill all Jews. That's an insanely psychotic thing to say, especially when there are Jewish people saying it. They don't want to kill themselves. Right. The entire pro-genocide crowd is just insane, expecting us to believe that the Jewish Voices for Peace want to die. That's not at all what this movement is about. It's about everybody having the ability to live free of fear, have the things they need in life, the opportunities to move forward and to live their best lives, to be safe, to be well fed, to be able to have a community That's what we're fighting for, not just here, everywhere in the world, and that includes Gaza and the West Bank.